I just want to get to the breaking news because an independent autopsy found that George Floyd's death was a homicide and that he died of a quote-unquote asphyxiation from sustained pressure. What does this mean in terms of the judicial system as charges are brought against the perpetrators of this death?
Well, I think that anybody who watched that video could see what was happening. It was an act of complete inhumanity of one person against another. And I am not surprised by this information, and it will add to the evidence, I believe, that we need in order to hold these four former Minneapolis police officers accountable. And as you know, the state attorney general, Keith Ellison, has been tasked to be the prosecutor of this case, and I believe that Keith will pursue justice relentlessly, and that's what we need to do. We need to seek the truth and get accountability.
What has been going on in Minneapolis? We've seen the scenes play out all across the country of largely peaceful protests with a rash of violence. Here in Washington, D.C., we saw that play out right outside of the White House. What's been going on in your state?
Well, last night we had largely peaceful protests, though we did have 150 protesters arrested for breaking the curfew. I have seen in my city, and not only in Minneapolis, but in cities across the state, people peacefully protesting, lifting up their voices, expressing their grief and their anger and their demand for change. And I also have seen in Minneapolis how neighbors have banded together to protect themselves and to protect their communities from the small number of people who are doing this dangerous and really destructive rioting and looting. And that looting and rioting and arson is burning down the grocery stores in the communities where people only have one choice. It is burning down these beloved community institutions. So putting a stop to that violence has been extremely important. And we've had now 2 nights of relative quiet in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and that I think will allow us to move forward to the action that we need to take to address the systemic problems in our police department and in our community.
Senator, I was struck by the family members of George Floyd who have come out and called for there to be peaceful protests. What important role do they play here in trying to bring about structural change?
Well, the voices of George Floyd's family are voices of such integrity and such power right now. I think that it was George's brother who went to the place where George lost his life on the corner of 38th in Chicago and said, pleaded for peace, pleaded for justice, and said we need to keep his name ringing, which is such a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. I think that sometimes we need to remember, we always need to remember. This is something that my colleague Cory Booker said, that it's not just about getting rid of the violence, it is about having justice. And, peace without, you have to have both of those things. And that is what we are seeking in Minnesota right now. We are seeking justice.
Senator, yesterday on CNN, Susan Rice, the former national security advisor in the Obama administration, made suggestions that there could be foreign actors that are perpetuating some of the violence in these protesters and that they are organized by groups like Antifa. Based upon your conversations with local and state law enforcement officials, do you believe that there are other factors at play here besides just the largely peaceful protesters?
Well, the public safety professionals in Minnesota that have been addressing this rash of rioting and looting tell us that there is evidence that that there are some number of people from outside of the community that are contributing to this, that it's organized, that it is planned, whether it is on the far left or on the far right, that it is there's a large number of vehicles in our community without license plates or with false license plates. Commissioner Harrington of the Department of Public Safety talked about stopping a car with license plates that were expired, and the man immediately tried to douse the car with gasoline, which, as the commissioner said, is not a normal pattern of behavior if you are stopped. So I think that there is no doubt about there being some of that. How much of it, how pervasive it is, I don't think that we really know. And the most important thing is that we need to be keeping the peace and allowing us to get justice here and addressing these systemic challenges that have been so pervasive.
Well, I want to talk about those systemic challenges, and that's just my one final question for you. There's been so much talk about a potential next round of economic stimulus, but do you think it's important that included in that next congressional vehicle that there be some type of structural change here incorporated in that type of legislation?
Well, I know that there are things that we can do and we must do at the level of Congress. There are also things that need to happen at the state level and the local level. One thing that I have called for is that the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division should do an investigation of the patterns and practice of the Minneapolis Police Department to root out this culture of bias and excessive force that means that you are many times more likely to be targeted for excessive force if you are a black person than if you are a white person. So that is one step that we could take right away with the Department of Justice that wouldn't even require congressional action, and it would allow us to get some accountability in this department. Of course, this is not just about Minneapolis Police Department. We have these challenges in police departments all over the country.